Hello, good evening. I just need to do a quick Bible study here because it is so cold, and I know I haven't done a Bible study in a little while, and basically it's been so freezing cold in this garage. I have a couple of things. I have to send an invoice and write an argument, and I was just trying to motivate myself to come down here by saying, "Oh, I can go see my friends and do a Bible study," and so it's not just pencil pushing. But the argument, actually, I was supposed to do a debate tonight in 30 minutes, but I had to reschedule that because I have not written my argument. I only just started today, but it's an argument against the First Amendment. I'm going to be opposing it. The resolution is the First Amendment successfully protects the rights of the American citizen. So I'm going to be arguing with a good friend of mine that I'm really glad he's willing to do this because he's not a public figure or anything, but a good Christian man who just loves America. One of your classic American Christians, hardworking, reliable American, and very important demographic to me. So, um, because of him and because of Miss Caw, just really, really being offended and calling me treasonous for opposing the First Amendment, I decided a month ago that I wanted to do this debate. And hopefully it's not going to hurt me to do it, but basically I'm going to argue that the First Amendment does not successfully protect the rights of the American citizen. I do not like the Bill of Rights. I do not like the Constitution. Kind of, my strength is kind of the same as the Bible. I'm one of the few people who've actually read it, and I love the Bible. The Bible's great, and I think the Constitution's a joke. I think people don't understand what it is, what it came from, what it's about, and they don't understand the Bill of Rights, first 10 amendments. I actually kind of have a poetic and a series. I had a series of essays I worked on, but basically saying that the Bill of Rights was the 10 amendments was kind of a bastardization of the 10 commandments, and that was the idea. Thomas Jefferson, who authored them, was he took a pair of scissors to the Bible. He hated the Bible. Um, and the political reality is interesting because, like I said, most people have no idea what's in the Constitution. Constitution's kind of a, kind of a, uh, an uninteresting document. It's very bureaucratic. It has very little in it that would inspire any kind of patriotism. It just sets up the government. And most people, when they talk about the Constitution, they really mean the Bill of Rights. And the Constitution is revolutionary because it was the one faction of the American politicians seizing power from all the rest in setting up a strong federal government, and then the opposition to the Constitution was the Bill of Rights. They had to pass the Bill of Rights in order to compromise because they did it. They formed the Constitution illegally. So that whole thing is very interesting. It's the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, or you could call them the Republicans and the Central Powers faction. The faction that wanted a strong Central Powers. John Adams was actually almost a monarchist. So, and I like John Adams as far as American figures go. Anyways, but we're reading Ezekiel 27, and then I will do this work, God willing. And he brought me again to the gate of the house, and behold, waters issued out from the threshold, from under the threshold of the house toward the east. For the forefront of the house looked towards the east, but the waters came down to the right side of the temple, to the south part of the altar. By the way, what you've missed these last 10 chapters is Ezekiel receives a vision where God takes him to Jerusalem with an angel and literally measures the whole temple for chapters and chapters of just measurements. And it's interesting how many times in the Bible God lays out what the temple is. And I think that, like, by the measurement, by the cubit. So it's like measuring it by the foot. And I think that that's significant in a lot of ways. I was talking to a friend of mine, and I streamed, and then he streamed with secular Quranism, and I think he has a different opinion. So a lot of people think we're in the end times, and we're not. And it's just a common opinion that for people who really like the Bible, that politics looks like a series of failures and descents into the Antichrist government, where the Christians are less and less in control of government. And that's actually not what politics is. And to be honest with you, if you, on a mystical level, understand that every time God establishes the church in a political way, he always establishes the temple and he always establishes sacrifices. And priests, it's always tied up with land. One of the chapters was talking about how to lay out the land and what sacrifices you're going to do every day. So those chapters where he describes how to build the tabernacle, where he describes how to build the temple, that's actually has a lot more to do with what God wants out of politics than St. John's apocalypse. St. John's apocalypse describes a very brief 7-year period with the Antichrist, and that is not a picture of the political reality of history. Now that those themes will repeat throughout history, especially when the devil has control in an evil age like he does now. But there are good ages. And when there are good ages, God builds something. And when he builds something, well, it looks like his temple, basically. It looks in a very ordered way that's extremely magnificent. And so it's worth thinking about. Anyways, let's see. And when the man that had the line in his hand went out towards the east, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he brought me through the water up to the ankles. And again he measured 1,000, and he brought me through the water up to the knees. And he measured 1,000, and he brought me through the water up to the loins. And he measured 1,000, and it was a torrent which I could not pass over, for the waters were risen so as to make a deep torrent which could not be passed over. I interpret that to mean peoples, because usually waters are a signifier of the nations. But let's see what they have. These waters are not to be understood literally, for there were none such that flowed from the temple, but mystically, of the baptism of Christ and of his doctrine and his grace. The trees that grow on the banks are Christian virtues. The fishes are Christians that spiritually live in and by these holy waters. The fishermen are the apostles and apostolic preachers. The fenny places where there is no health are such as by being out of the church are separated from these waters of life. Well, that's interesting. So we're going back to that. I read, I believe in Augustine, that creation he saw, the 6 days of creation he saw as being mystically significant, of course. And he's on the fourth day of creation, when the fish and the birds were made. The fish were the nations and the birds were the apostles. And the idea was that they flew over the waters fishing, basically pulling out the people from the waters. So I wanted to say something else about that, but now I can't remember. Oh, I wanted to say that the last 2 chapters I was reading in Ezekiel, he lays out. Thank you so much. You're a very virtuous fella. Thank you very much, sir. Keep up the good work. Sorry for boring you, but you're a good man. Try to support you. I'm looking forward to talking to you here in about a week. But so the angel tells him, when you give land, when you get back to the land and you have the temple and you separate the land by lots to the different nations, he lays out a specific piece of ground for the king, for the prince, to have. And he says, the prince will no longer rob my people. Now, what I found interesting about that was, of course, the first time they came, they had the judges. And I have argued that the judges were kings, which I think is obvious. But there was an indication, there wasn't really a provision for a prince. And God himself says that to Ezekiel. But after Israel's called out of Babylon to settle Palestine again, I don't recall there being a king. There's King Herod, but I don't recall there being a king unless Nehemiah said. So I don't know if that was ever fulfilled, which I'd like to know. I wonder if the Protestants ever dug into that, because this is all they have, so they usually should dig into things. Anyways, he said to me, surely thou hast seen, O son of man. And he brought me out, and he caused me to turn to the bank of the torrent. And when I had turned myself, behold, on the bank of the torrent were very many trees on both sides. And he said to me, These waters issue forth toward the hillocks of sand to the east, and go down to the plains of the desert, shall go into the sea, and shall go out, and the waters shall be healed. And every living creature that creepeth whithersoever the torrents shall come shall live, and there shall be fishes in abundance after these waters shall come thither, and they shall be healed, and all things shall live to which the torrent shall come. And the fishers shall stand over these waters from Engadi even to Engalim. There shall be drying of nets. There shall be many sorts of the fishes thereof, as the fishes of the great sea, a very great multitude. Yes, thank you, sir. But on the shore thereof, and in fenny places, they shall not be healed, because they shall be turned into salt pits. And by the torrent on the banks thereof, on both sides, shall grow all trees that bear fruit. Their leaf shall not fall off, and their fruit shall not fail. Every month shall they bring forth first fruits, because the waters thereof shall issue out of the sanctuary, and the fruits thereof shall be for food, and the leaves thereof for medicine. That's interesting. Thus saith the Lord God, this is the border by which you shall possess the land according to the 12 tribes of Israel. For Joseph hath a double portion. And just so you know, Mr. Ethics, 6 years ago, I really care about my people, and like deeply. I think God actually made me to be a father to my own people, which is something that we don't have right now, and that's a Catholic tradition. I was just reading about uh, Raymond Fugger in the at the end of the medieval age. The Fugger family was the usurer family that maintained a Catholic um, tradition, even though they were engaging in usury. And it's very interesting in Germany when, and that's what triggered the Protestant Reformation, that kind of thing. But they called him a father of the poor, and that's kind of a common theme you see in true Catholic political morality. That's where paternalism comes from. But 6 years ago, when I got onto YouTube, it was after succeeding in business, and then I started listening to politics when Trump got elected. It was about 2018. So it was like 2 years of listening to politics and different political speakers and stuff like that. Then I left the city. I went to the countryside, and I started doing Bible studies on YouTube, basically to serve my people. And I kind of, that's where my audience originally came from. And I still have some of those people today who have kept in touch with me, who have like sent messages to me. My wife came out of that. So I met my wife and married her. And so I do these Bible studies partly as like checking the pulse and having this place and this setting where I can kind of feel out how people are doing and give them an opportunity to like come see me and talk to me, if that makes sense. So it's good to see you every time, because you're obviously a brand new person and you're part of this new thing God's doing with me um, where it just seems like God has spread out the virtue outside of the church so much. And I think he's converting a new church. So that's very interesting. I would be very interested in debating a Muslim. Yeah, I um, I might need more than a month. So here's the thing. So I've got this debate on the First Amendment, and I'm moving my family. So on the 16th of February, we're going to be hitting the road and moving 17 hours away. Now I actually suspect through prayer and meditation that the next season, the next few months after that, are going to be very restful, and so I might be able to do multiple debates. My policy was one debate a month, and we'll see if that actually happens. But anyways, but what I wanted to say is, after I move my family, after I do this debate, the next debate I wanted to do was with A's philosophy. I wanted to debate him on St. Paul, because I saw when he streamed with you, he said no Christians ever debated me on this, and I thought they would. And I said, well, I could do that. I love St. Paul. It would take a very minimal amount of study, because I don't think he understands. From what I heard about him talking about St. Paul, um, I think he probably has read St. Paul a lot more closely than I have, because I've read the Old Testament very closely. I've read the prophets very closely this year, and the Gospels not as much. The New Testament I'm not as good at, which is rare. So I wanted to debate him on St. Paul because I think I owe that to him out of Christian charity. And then I wanted to debate you on, uh, I think it was creationism, and give you a run for your money, unless you wanted to debate a different topic. But I'd love to do that. And so I wanted to do that maybe in 2 months because I need to really, really work hard and prepare for that. St. Paul, I think I'm really good at the Bible. I don't have enough. I'm not good enough to like dig apart unless I really focus on one part of the Bible or another. But I've written apologetics before. I know how to use the Bible, and I've just never sat down and really dug through St. Paul. So I think I can handle A's philosophy because that's his style, and I want to meet him where he's at. He's very sola scriptura, which is interesting because he doesn't believe in scriptural inerrancy, and I'd love to do that with him because I think just from the Bible, um, if God is true and the Catholic Church is true, I should be able to prove that St. Paul is is one of the two most important adherents to Jesus Christ that have ever lived as far as public ministry goes. Nobody has been closer or more closely united to Jesus Christ and agreed with him more than St. Paul and St. Peter. Those two are the two in the church, you know, that takes that very, very seriously. But as far as creationism goes, I know you sent me something, and I'd like for you to send me again because we agreed on the parameters. Where basically I was going to watch because I'm not as skilled. Oh no, it was the Ark. It was Noah's flood, if I recall. But it was in that field of topics. You're a boat builder, and you were going to send me something, so I'd kind of get a little bit of a handicap because I'm not as skilled in natural science as you are, since you're a boat builder, and I'm more of a literature person. And then after that, I probably would love to debate this Muslim. Do I have a mod in mind for the debate with A's? You said A's philosophy said, I wonder if you would do it, if you would do it on your channel, if you'd be willing to host it. And I think that would help us with all of our goals because we're trying to grow. I actually wanted to do some debates on A's philosophy's channel. I think the First Amendment one, just because I've been so bogged down, I don't have enough time to like set that up. But I wanted to do it on A's philosophy's channel to help him grow. So, but of course, if he's participating in the debate, I'd love to do it on your channel, and then maybe some of the future debates I can do on his channel. Reach out on Discord. Okay. I've really got to get to work here in a minute. Let's see. I'm being rude. Well, you know what? This is the point though. This is why I'm here. It's not I read the Bible every day. Um just so you know, like Catholic apologists of the 1500s, this and Protestant apologists, so the people who would argue about the Bible at the foundation of like the biggest controversy in the West since the Great Schism, um, that kind of has set the stage. It's basically the world we live in is because of what happened in the 1500s in Europe, um, religiously especially, but also economically. Um, is the standard back then, if you were going to argue about the Bible, is they would have the whole Bible memorized in Latin and they could recite it backwards. So um, when I read the Bible, I don't read it thinking, okay, I'm just going to pick out some things from this and this will be helpful for me in my life. That's part of it, but I'm constantly trying to familiarize myself with the content to my limited ability so that because when I talk about the Bible, I have as much of the whole thing in my mind as I can. And there's not many people who even try to do that or even capable of doing it. Most people only have maybe the New Testament at best or the Psalms. They can't hold everything in their head. And for me, it's pretty tough. And so that's why I kind of have to continually read it. So I make sure that the things I say are consistent. And I can, whenever I say something's in the Bible or I'm trying to teach and I say this is biblical, there's like many different corresponding parts that aren't even the parts that you normally hear because you hear sermons and people reference the same parts over and over again. well, look, I mean, most people don't reference the God measuring the temple, but I got something out of that. Anyways, okay, there we go. Yeah, we're friends, man. We're friends. I think I've been thinking about you a lot because I was watching your content and I was watching your debate. I haven't finished it. It seemed like from the comments that you thought you lost, which I find really interesting because that was a debate between you and Mark Reed. Um, and so I want to finish it and give you my opinion. But I'm personally, the more I listen to you, the more I think, okay, you haven't actually had the opportunity to meet some religious intellectuals that are are very like serious about say the contents of the Bible. I think A's philosophy is really good about that because he's a creationist. I don't even know Derek McAllister, Dr. Derek. He might not be a creationist. I wouldn't be surprised if he was an evolutionist. Just on that one topic. Because when I've heard you deride the Bible, or when I heard you deride some things with A's philosophy, talking about Saint Paul, or when you're talking to other atheists, and I hear you kind of deride some things that are illogical about religion, um, it's just interesting to me. I can see that because you're a wise man, and you did that thing about your background, which I thought was, and if anybody wants to listen to that, nobody, anyways, but I do recommend Objective Ethics video if you're going to watch one thing from him. It's like something about the use of, or the, to not be afraid. I can't remember the title of the video, but that was a good one. And because I'm always thinking, everyone I know and everyone that I like, but even people I don't like, um, I'm always thinking about like, what is God trying to do with this person? You know what I mean? Anyways, I'm just gonna knock this out real quick. Courage without fear. Yeah, watch that video because that is fascinating. Very fascinating. So yeah. So I'm looking. So that's my plans as far as debate goes, and of course we're gonna leave. We're gonna be in a whole new living situation here, and it'll be very interesting. So you said I'm very proud of that video. Can I ask you? No, I'm not gonna nitpick you on this, but can I ask you something about, because you believe in virtue and you're an Aristotelian, it seems like, um, and I've not read Aristotle. Pardon me. I've read Thomas Aquinas, who draws from Aristotle. Obviously, that was the whole thing that Thomas Aquinas was doing in Summa Theologica, was baptizing Aristotle's work. I don't know what he says about the vices, but I don't know what your opinion is on the vices either. So I think you've talked about pride, um, but I have a whole opinion on that, on the use of pride in speech. Like, I'm very proud of this type of thing. I know it's not what people usually mean. All right. Thus saith, I'm just going to knock this out real quick so I could say I did it and then keep going with whenever I read the Bible. I might have to read this chapter again anyways, but why? Why do I have to do that? I'll keep reading until you give me something else, and then I'll stop procrastinating. I have to write one invoice, and then I'll attempt to make an argument against the First Amendment. How do you feel about the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights? I'm going to do a debate opposing the First Amendment. I'm not going to be able to do it live on YouTube, unfortunately. I'm going to do it on Discord. But if you want to be there on Discord, we could certainly have you. It would be nice to have some audience, some smart questions. Because I know politics is ran. We scheduled this debate like a month ago, but now everyone's talking about ICE and what's going on with immigration, and everyone's bringing up the First Amendment, which is very interesting. I don't like the First Amendment. I think that the First Amendment has not successfully protected the rights of the American citizen. And the whole first 10, I mean, the whole Bill of Rights, I think, is basically a failure. And everyone implicitly admits that the Bill of Rights is the important part of the Constitution, because the Constitution itself is Constitution proper is just political organization. It's the Congress is formed this way with votes, and we have an executive and we have a judicial. That's what the Constitution is. Thus saith the Lord God, this is the border by which you shall possess the land according to the 12 tribes of Israel. For Joseph hath a double portion, and you shall possess it, every man in like manner as his brother, concerning which I lifted up my hand to give it to your fathers, and this land shall fall unto you for a possession. And this is the border of the land toward the north side from the great sea by the way of Hethlon, as men go to Sedada, Amath, Berothah, Sabarim, between the border of Damascus and the border of Amath, the house of Tychon, which by the border of Aaron. Now, I was just talking at the beginning of this about politics and how God arranges the political sphere. And if you take the Bible seriously, and you say, okay, this is the wisdom of the ages. Okay, I don't believe this is inerrant. Now, I believe it's inerrant. But let's say you don't think that. Let's say this is just the foundation of our culture in the West. Well, and it's wisdom, ancient wisdom. Well, then if you read it and its content, you will find out that God cares about borders a lot, and he cares about money a lot. And those are the two things when God establishes social justice or political justice or distributive justice, is he makes sure that he tells you exactly what the borders are, and he makes sure he tells you exactly what measurements are used. Because, of course, in economics, which means management of the household, naturally, traditionally, you're talking about the management of many different types of resources. And that's everything you need to live. That's all the food, all the wine, all the fruit, all the all the meat, everything. That's economics. And he gives you specific measurements and specific borders. And when you study the Jubilee, there's two elements to the Jubilee. Because, of course, I hate usury. I think that's the only problem in the whole world is usury. It's only usury. That's the only problem. There's no other problem. Just usury. And it started in the church. This I recently figured out by reading the book Barren Metal. It started in the church in the 1500s with Rome, in the Roman Curia, with the cardinals. That's where usury started, and it has not been resolved. And that is, all of our problems come from literally loans from usury committed by cardinals in the 1500s. That's where usury starts. So the Jubilee, there are two elements. Forgive all debts, which includes releasing all the slaves, which is important because debt is slavery. But also, every man returns to his father's homeland. And in fact, when Jesus Christ is born, St. Joseph and the Blessed Mother, you can call her St. Mary, but those two are going to Bethlehem, which is where their fathers were born. That's where their father's land is. That's their patrimony, which is really interesting. People don't understand that in America because we have no patrimony, which is why you can't even be in America. If you have the virtue of patriotism, it doesn't translate. When people say I'm a patriotic American, they don't even know what they're saying. You have no fatherland here. This land was not your father's land. My patrimony is in Ireland. I personally think God has given the Irish people a patrimony in Appalachia. That was part of his plan. But given that, I assume you have given ultimate authority of your life to your faith in God, but through the Catholic Church, it doesn't surprise me that you don't support the First Amendment. First Amendment is the fundamental principle that acknowledges individual autonomy and the people's right to file grievances against the government. Well, I'm glad to hear that you actually know what it says. So the First Amendment is, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the first thing is that Congress shall make no law, which people don't even know that. They say freedom of religion. Well, that's actually the second clause. So the first clause specifically has to do with an establishment of religion, which is interesting. Now, I'm in a debate on this, and I don't want to weaken myself too much. by revealing my thinking. But I think that this is actually a complex enough thing to argue about that I'm not giving away too much. But in those first two clauses, you have the freedom of religion, and the first clause is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, which, if I have time, I'd like to look into what that really means, because those are the exact words, right, in English. Well, in the 1800s, in 1770 or 1784, when Thomas Jefferson wrote that, what does he mean? Make no law? Does he mean Congress shall make no law establishing a religion, or does he mean Congress shall show no special respect towards an already established religion? Because I don't think it means the latter. I think it means the former, and that's probably true, but people might misread it. So the question there is, what protects? Because the resolution is the First Amendment successfully protects the rights of the American citizen. The question is, what protects the rights of the American citizen more, religion or government, specifically Congress? Because Congress was the whole point of the Constitution. The judicial and the executive branches were kind of afterthoughts. It was all about Congress because they're the ones who are making the laws. The whole idea of three equal branches, that actually came later, and it was because of the work of presidential people like George Washington and the first Chief Justice. Don't quote me, I think it's John Marshall. But the judicial branch was nothing in the eyes of the founders. He seized power, basically, and turned it into something. And the executive was kind of left open because everyone understood that George Washington was gonna do whatever George Washington was gonna do. There was no opposing George Washington. He was so popular and such an effective politician. So the question is, from Thomas Jefferson's point of view, who opposes George Washington, really opposes Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, is because he can't oppose. No one could oppose George Washington that day. Is he's a military hero. There's many things about him that make him hard to oppose. If a religion is established, if we have an established religion, because this is being written in opposition to three things: England, obviously everyone knows that, the Catholic Church, and the third thing would be other Freemasonic visionaries like George Washington, John Adams, Ben Franklin, who were three very significant people in writing the Constitution that Thomas Jefferson was cut out of, and now he's responding. Those are his political rivals and enemies. So he's writing this in opposition to those people. So he's thinking about the established Church of England, and he's thinking about the established Catholic Church, and which are very importantly integrated with government. And the traditional view up to that point, none of them were traditionalist, obviously. They were all liberal revolutionaries. That's why it's called the Revolutionary War. He's so he's basically, well, it's a question. I mean, because these people are also political realists and political opportunists, and so he might not want there to be freedom of religion. He might want everyone to be the same religion, but he has such a radically unpopular religion that if you reveal it, nobody's going to want to follow it. He worshipped the Freemasonic God, which was a very specific thing. It's not the God of the Bible. That's why in the Freemasonic rituals they have the Quran and they have other texts that they use, not the Bible. And they kind of believe that the Old Testament God was a different God than the New Testament God, and there were some differences there. This is very early on in Freemasonic history. So he might not even want freedom of religion. He might want to create an environment that just encourages people in a certain way. He doesn't even necessarily want people to know the truth about religion. We can't assume that these men had that traditional Christian idea of wanting everyone to worship the right God, which is the first the first commandment: "Thou shalt have no other gods," and that has everything to do with knowing exactly which God is the true God. Because when Moses gave the first commandment from God, he was dealing with the fact that the Israelites were confused and couldn't tell the difference between a cow, a literal calf, and God Almighty. They couldn't. They were incapable of doing it. And most of your biblical commentators talk about that, and that has a lot to do with why Genesis is written the way it is, and so on and so forth. So Thomas Jefferson is dealing with a Christian population, and well, anyways, that's probably enough. It's very interesting from a philosophical point of view, from a political philosophy point of view. It's very interesting in many different ways. The fact that we give tax exemption to religious organizations, we have already failed the First Amendment, in my opinion. Well, that's, well, I don't want to give away too much, but yeah, I mean, basically, I don't think that the First Amendment has ever even been feasible. I don't think it's possible, and I think it comes down to that. I think an established religion defends the rights of people much more effectively than any government ever would, which you know from history. You know, for instance, England. You know, when England broke away from the Catholic Church, it was to loot the property of England and of the monasteries, and it was one of the largest, like, and most effective looting operations as far as the wealth, the 900 years collected wealth that was stored in the monasteries. That was the patrimony of the poor. That was the land they work. The landlords of the monasteries were the best feudal lords compared to the aristocrats. Well, the aristocrats seized all the monarchies, and England fell into this tyranny and anarchy that basically the Enlightenment in England, which most of your Enlightenment philosophers came about to try to explain and justify and heal this wound that was created because the aristocracy seized the church. And so they got rid of their established religion, and rights went out the window. And then they had to write for 200 years. They had to write WRITE about rights, RIGHT, for 200 years. And what was the most significant topic that they talked about? Property. Why? Because it was inaugurated with the seizure of church property. That's why. Because the anarchy of getting rid of the established religion that was defending people, and does defend people, because ultimately monks are poor. They're poor. They're sworn to poverty. And there's no aristocrat that can even possibly ever be sworn to. There's no ruler, no politician. Closest you have is somebody like Cato the Younger. But ultimately, your political rulers are rich and have to be rich, and they usually have children. And so you need an opposition to that. And it's your celibate, not just your priesthood, but also your religious celibates, monks and whatnot, nuns. Anyways, yes, property. And that's what God cares about. Look, he's talking about borders. He goes straight to it. And the east side is from the midst of Arn, and from the midst of Damascus, and from the midst of Gilad, and from the midst of the land of Israel, Jordan making the bound to the east sea, and thus you shall measure the east side. And the south side southward is from Tamar, even to the waters of contradiction of Cadiz, and the Torn even to the great sea, and this is the south side southward. Now, see, this is where it's like my failure as a biblical scholar is apparent, because I know that the contradiction of Cadiz and Tamar are referencing very specific events that happened. I believe the contradiction of Cadiz had to do with, I mean, if it's in the land of Israel, I'm thinking it has to do with Moses, but it might not. And I think Tamar is the daughter of Judah that he incestuously interacts with, who is the wife of Judah's son that committed Onan, I believe. So, but I don't know. I don't actually know. And I don't want to like break out some kind of artificial tool like a concordance, because that just kind of, it's like driving with GPS. You don't actually get a lay of the land that way. The Bible is made by the same person who designed our souls. And so it kind of interacts with your soul in a way that other books approach, but it is the book. Anyways, and the side toward the sea is the great sea, from the border straight on till thou come to Emath. This is the side of the sea. I will say about Judah, um, it's really interesting because when I deal with somebody like Mr. Ethics or an atheist, I got into an argument with Christians the other day because they talked about Iran. The Muslims wanted to genocide the Jews, and I said, well, the Jews want to genocide the Muslims. And then I said, the Bible justifies genocide, um, and which it does. It does justify genocide. Not all genocide, obviously, but it has a genocide commanded by God that is committed. And a scholar friend of mine said, well, that's a policide. It's only a city. Okay, well, how much do you have to steal before it's theft? The act is still a type of genocide. It's the example we have in the Bible of what would be a just genocide. And not only that, but the Jews and the Muslims both reference that when doing what they do. So when the Jews persecute Palestinians, they're thinking about the Amalekites. But of course, these Christians are like, no, it doesn't, because genocide means bad. No, it doesn't. It's not what genocide means. Genocide is a sin. Not technically, being naked is a sin. Having sex, or being naked is not a sin. Having sex is not a sin. Adultery is a sin. So genocide is not technically a sin. That's a category error. It is, if it was a sin, then God couldn't do it. So you have to parse it out a little bit more, because God has wiped out whole races of people many times. So so then the question becomes, if you're sober, which is why people can't handle the Old Testament. That's why the traditional churches said most people shouldn't read the Old Testament. They don't know what the heck's going on there. But now everyone has to read it. But basically, we know that's in there. And so we ask ourselves, well, what did God do? What did God give us as the reasoning for this genocide that he commanded? Or other examples, like when he tells Joshua to deceive people, like he gives a military strategy and basically says, deceive these people so you can burn their houses and their children and their wives behind them to scare them and that kind of stuff. And then they lose their morale. Like, God commands things like that repeatedly. Not repeatedly. They're pretty unique circumstances. It's not a common thing he does. And basically, the justification he gives is always related to sexual sin. And I would even argue that it points towards ritualistic pedophilia. That's what it actually does point towards, and that's when God himself starts to say this whole people needs to be killed, even the children, because it's better for them than to grow up this way. And of course, in America, we are facing that kind of judgment from God. And because we have the gospel, and there's basically so many masses and so many people praying effectively and that kind of thing, that's why we haven't seen it yet. But the longer we go without receiving punishment, and the longer we go without repenting as a society, which is a complicated thing to do, difficult thing to do. The Ninevites are a good example. But the longer we go, the more that eventual punishment will be, the harsher it will be, basically. And you shall divide this land unto you by the tribes of Israel, and you shall divide it by lot for an inheritance to you, and to the strangers that shall come over to you shall beget children among you, and they shall be unto you as men of the same country, born among the children of Israel. They shall divide the possession with you in the midst of the tribes of Israel, and in what tribe soever the stranger shall be, there you shall give him possession, saith the Lord God. I will tell you this about the American South, since I am leaving it. They mistreat the stranger horribly. And they lost the Civil War. And the reason they lost the Civil War is because they persecuted Catholics, which can be seen by the KKK, um, which was formed from veterans of the Confederates. How they funded the opposition to the Cristeros, the communist, atheist government opposition to the Cristeros in Mexico. They hate Catholics. South has always hated Catholics. And that's why God let them lose, because obviously the North was much more immoral than the South, and still is. But it's because the South mistreated the Catholic Church, especially like North Carolina and places like that. And I wanted to say one more thing about the South, but I might have lost it. But there's a lot I could say about the South. But the South is better than the North on a moral level, but they mistreat the stranger. They're full of gossip, and they're very foolish. They're so afraid of ever being an accessory to a man. So like in the North, among Yankees, I can use somebody. If I need somebody to help me, I can use them, and I can tell a man, "This is how I'm going to use you, and this is why I want to do it," and I can get away with it. In the South, there's so much pride that they refuse to ever be used in that way, and because of that, they're basically spend their whole lives being manipulated by women, because women use you without telling you they're doing it. So men are more upfront, and that's a problem. It's a real problem. So, anyways, God bless you. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you all wherever. If you need to talk to me, talk to me. Bye. No, that's not what I want. That's what I want. Too many buttons, man. I just gotta simplify this stuff.